great to hear the previous two presentations. Just fantastic work, and I hope there'll be some connections between what I'm talking about and those two talks. There clearly will be an element. I think I've got some slides actually that cover a little bit of the same ground, but not in as much detail and not as articulately as yours. So I have been talking about this idea of biophilic cities. Sometimes I say biophilic urbanism. So combining the biophilia and the urbanism together. And so we've got something called the Biophilic Cities Project. Let's see. Is this going? Am I not advancing in the right way? I don't need to point this way.
Oh, point it up that way.
Point it up that way. It does, no?
It's not working. Blow on.
Blow on. If there's, I don't have a machine to
we'll have a human in between.
Yeah, really? Okay. That may be a little hard to do because I have this habit of going back and forth and doing all kinds of funny things. But and there's a second part to that. Go ahead and advance. This often happens in my lectures where the battery goes dead just at the right time. So there is a little book called Biophilic Cities that was mentioned, and I'm going to try to go fast through these slides and tell you about what cities are doing. Oh, great! An actual keyboard. Yay, that works. And then I'll go back. Yeah, marvelous. So if you end up wanting a little bit more information about some of the cities and some of the ideas, there is this little book, Biophilic Cities. I'm also going to tell a few stories from a documentary film that we've just done called The Nature of Cities that has been playing on PBS stations, and kind of a visceral demonstration of some of the concepts of nature and cities. So there are some resources. So this is really the challenge for me that we've been trying to tackle. How can we imagine, most of us in urban planning, sustainable urbanism, imagine cities that are going to be denser and compact. We want them to be those ways. We want them, if we really need to move in the direction of sustainability, we want to create cities where it's possible to walk and where we're investing in public transit and compact urban form that has a much smaller carbon footprint and profoundly uses less energy. So we want cities. We're celebrating cities, and we're not going to shift, of course. We're moving down a global urban path. But how do we also incorporate that nature that we increasingly know we need? So thus this Biophilic Cities project, this is a screenshot of the webpage, and I'd love for everyone to take a look. It's www.biophilic.cities.org. And we have a weekly blog and a monthly e-newsletter, and if you want to learn more, add your name and we'll send you. There's one coming out just this week about insects in cities in honor of cicadas. So we love cicada. We have lots of cicada essays. Anyway, there's a page about each of our partner cities. So much of this project is about exploring what is a biophilic city, what does it look like, feel like, what could it be like, what could a future city be, and then partner cities around the US and around the world. And we're getting ready actually for a big launch event, conference in October at the University of Virginia, and there's a little bit of information about that on the webpage if anyone's interested, October 17th to 20th, where we're going to come together and think about what the future agenda really needs to be. So, already mentioned, Ed Wilson here at Harvard, who's a hero for a lot of us, wasn't the first person to use the term biophilia, but he really did coin it in the sense, the way we use it today, which is this idea, of course, that we've co-evolved with nature. We've lived in that natural setting, that we're carrying with us our ancient brains. And it's not a big surprise that we are happier and healthier and more productive in the presence of nature. So this is one of Ed Wilson's definitions, biophilia, the innately emotional affiliation of human beings to other living organisms. Innate means hereditary and hence part of ultimate human nature. So we are hardwired to need that connection with nature. And our argument is that it's not something that you can get on a holiday in the summer. That you might do that, and you might have a terrific immersive event, immersive week or two or month. But the nature that we need has to be around us. It has to be all around us. It has to be the everyday nature. It's the nature that you're experiencing daily, hourly, and the nature that we're seeing behind this building right now. It has to be with us. It has to be around us. And to be truly happy and healthy and to live meaningful lives, we do need that nature. Now, Alan's talked about forest bathing. I just love the terminology, the English translation, the idea of forest bathing, that you walking through a forest and that the dappled light and the colors and the bird sounds, and that's a kind of experience. And having that in the city is not a big surprise, of course, when you see stress hormone levels going down, and as you nicely talked about, the boost to our immune system. So there are clearly health implications. I sometimes talk about the natural social capital building capabilities of nature. So these two women on the left are featured in our documentary film, and we spent a day with them. They're two amateur wildlife trackers, urban wildlife trackers. So they've actually gone to school to learn the finer distinctions, to recognize. They can tell you, they can distinguish between a paw track of a domestic cat versus a bobcat, which we actually went looking for on the day that we filmed them. And it's a marvelous story. They have a very special friendship. We followed them around. We actually tried to keep up with them. They're in a place called Rose Canyon, one of the beautiful canyons in San Diego, kind of left over. Remarkable biodiversity in that city. Well, at a certain point we couldn't keep up with them, and at one point they went off the trail into the bushes, and we didn't know where they were until we heard this yelping, happy sound that they had discovered some blood on a branch, and thought that they had just been minutes away from seeing the resident female bobcat, which is what we were doing. That's the kind of excitement that nature in the city can invoke, and the kind of awe and wonder that these two women had. But perhaps more importantly, this canyon serves as a context, a space for bringing together people and for forming friendships. Nature's not the only way that can happen, but it is uniquely suited for that. And as we know, deeper and more extensive friendships and social relations help us to, in many other ways. There are clear health benefits to having friendships. We know mortality rates go down for cancer, for instance.
Does the frog share these experiences?
The frog is, yes, we won't talk about the frog, that's part of the natural system. But these women will tell you that the neighborhoods surrounding the canyons are interesting, are diverse, and some are higher density housing sort of neighborhoods, some are single-family detached neighborhoods. They all come together in this canyon. They're neighbors who would probably not otherwise be interacting, and they've recently come together in an effort to protect the canyon, in fact. So we know that nature can have that ability, has that ability to bring us together. A lot of evidence about the impact of urban greening in healing urban spaces and addressing urban ills. This is a study from the American Journal of Epidemiology, year before last, showing, looking at places, neighborhoods in Philadelphia where they've planted trees, and again, not a big surprise, maybe compared with vacant lots, compared with those neighborhoods where tree planting didn't occur. In those green neighborhoods, they have seen a pretty significant reduction in gun assaults, gun violence, and vandalism. And also the greening of vacant lots associated with residents reporting less stress and more exercise. Not a big surprise either, that nature has this ability to bring us outside and to actually engage in physical activity and be with others, again, back to the social realm. And Philly actually has done some pretty remarkable things to green their urban environments. They have a long way to go, but one of the really interesting programs is the Philly Orchard Project, where they have been working with neighborhoods to help plant community-based orchards, and then to teach the neighbors how to maintain and manage those spaces. And they are located in neighborhoods that have some amount of food insecurity, and they become an important kind of green feature in the neighborhood as well. So there are a lot of reasons for us to think about how nature can be integrated into the core of urban design and planning. Another story from our documentary film, the amazing story in Austin, Texas. Some of you know about it. A few years ago, when they were renovating the main bridge that runs through the city of Austin, the Congress Avenue Bridge, and discovered that a large number of Mexican free-tailed bats came and during the summer, they're migratory, and occupied the spaces underneath the bridge. The first reaction, of course, of the city of Austin, I say of course, it shouldn't have been this way, but was this is a hazard, a public hazard. We have to eradicate the bats. And it set in motion a very interesting discussion. This fellow, Merlin Tuttle, founder of Bat Conservation International, actually moved BCI to Austin, Texas, and almost single-handedly shifted the attitude about the bats in that city. And the story really of a city that's moved quite dramatically in the direction of becoming a biophilic city. So instead of eradicating the bats, the 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats now come every year. They're celebrating the bats. And so people line up on the Congress Avenue Bridge, and there's a viewing area below the bridge to watch the emergence of these bats at sundown. And so I show this slide in part because there are pretty clear economic benefits to having nature in cities. Millions of dollars in tourism revenue, actually, for the city of Austin. There are 2 or 3 or 4 bat-watching dinner cruises that go up and down the lower Colorado River. The city of Austin has named their hockey team after the bats now. You could say that Austin's gone a little bit bat crazy. But a very, very good way, a very good story, and contrasts with other cities. Alan already mentioned this. We're actually both fans of Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester, who has done this amazing work. I think nature can make us better human beings. I think this experimental work showing that in the presence of nature, people exhibit more generous behavior, greater generosity, is pretty compelling. The critter on the right is a sulfur-crested cockatoo who, when we lived for a while in Sydney, Australia, and we moved into this apartment building, and almost on the first day, this flock came to our balcony and wanted to know how generous we were going to be. But it wasn't actually an important part of the biophilia of living in that city. So we've been trying to think about what makes for a biophilic city. What is a biophilic city? And of course, it's the presence or absence of nature, of course, and we look to fantastic examples like Helsinki. That's the background map is Helsinki. And the one notion is the idea that you ought to be able to walk out your door and have nature all around you, and then be able to move to progressively larger amounts of nature. So that in the case of Helsinki, you can walk from the center of that pretty dense city all the way out to old growth forest at the edge. So it's that neighborhood, block, city, region even that we've got to think about. And the idea of integrated networks of nature, integrated networks of green space that are connected and hierarchical to a certain degree. So it's a terrific city to start with. In this book, we try to start developing the metrics of how you might define a biophilic city, and this is not a very nice slide, but it's actually a box from the book. Biophilic conditions and infrastructure, pretty important category. We have a lot of examples now of cities being creative about how they measure the nature and creative in how they set targets for the future. Pretty common now, of course, for cities to incorporate some kind of target of having all their residents within a certain distance, a 5 to 10 minute walk, or a few hundred meters from a park or a green space. New York, other cities have done this. In the European Union, there is something called the Green Capital City designation. We've got one partner city that last year was the Green Capital City. In that application process, one of the things cities have to calculate is what percentage of your population lies within 300 meters of a park or green space. I'd probably argue 100 meters might be a better measure. So we're doing more of that. Many cities, of course, have calculated their vegetative cover or their tree canopy cover, and they're incorporating those kind of standards into their plans. That's important, but it's not the only thing. So that's one category. Biophilic activities is just as important, I would argue, to understand how urban residents actually engage that nature or don't. How interested, how active are they? Are they members of a birding club, a native plants organization? Are they active in urban greening and urban restoration, stream restoration work? How much time is spent outside? These are all important measures of of engagement and in some ways care for the environment, for the nature around them. A third category, biophilic attitudes and knowledge. How much do we know about that nature around us, and what is our affect towards it? How do we care about it? And then finally, biophilic institutions and governance. We know from looking at a number of our partner cities that the extent of the nature and the extent of the engagement with the nature by residents in those cities depends on a number of things. It depends on investments, on governance, on having foundational institutions. Things like a natural history museum are often important. One of our partner cities, Milwaukee, has just opened their third neighborhood-based urban ecology center. Those kinds of things are quite important to activating that biophilic engagement, if you will. So this was a kind of preliminary set of indices or set of metrics, and so this Biophilic Cities project we're working on now, funded by the Summit Foundation, Washington-based foundation, I should have said, will be fleshing out and articulating these metrics in a little bit more detail. Just another slide to make the point that it is not just the calculation of nature, not just the presence or absence of nature in that city, it's all of these other ways that we engage in nature. And a lot of it has to do with culture as well. The question about awe and wonder and being curious about the nature around us. And a culture of curiosity is something I often talk about. We see it in cities. It may be hard to measure it, but that's something as important to cultivate as the actual nature, I would say. So we have been talking, we sometimes use the language of vitamin G or vitamin N, as Rich Louv has talked about it. We've got our slightly different language. One of the key questions for us on this project, though, is what do we need? What is it that urbanites, how much and what kind of nature is needed in urban settings? And we sometimes frame this as what is the minimum daily requirement of nature? We've found it very helpful to think about this in terms of what we call the nature pyramid. You all know about the food pyramid as it's a little irritating that the USDA now is using plates rather than a food pyramid, but we like that. You know, the idea of having some guidance about what you should eat based on this pyramid, the things at the top may be good for you in small measures and small amounts, but that we want to build your diet at that base. So it's fruits and vegetables, and grains and things like that. Well, what are the analogous things in a nature diet? In our nature pyramid, there are things at that top. Flying off to Costa Rica to immerse yourself in the cloud forest for a month may not be the way we want you to do it. Maybe it's not going to be possible for most people, and our global carbon footprint we can't afford to have you do that. So we've got to think about what is that. Again, the everyday nature. What are the building blocks of the nature experience? And that's something we're trying to parse and flesh out a little bit. So even thinking about what constitutes a dose, or what constitutes a serving, if you want to carry forward this nutritional comparison. Is a dose, or is a serving a bird flying by, enjoying that bird's sound? Is it two birds? Two birds and a green roof? Two birds, a green roof, and 5 trees? It gets complicated, and in urban environments we have a combination of things at work. We want to know something about what they deliver in terms of value and benefit and wonder, for instance. So that's a key question. I don't have any answers for you at the moment, but we're trying to address that. It's interesting, some of our partner cities like this idea of the nature pyramid, so they've started to develop their own. I sometimes get this question, well, is the nature pyramid, is this kind of like this, every city have their own version of this, and is it like the Mediterranean diet? And you can't. And so our partner city, Singapore, decided they wanted their own pyramid based on their own their indigenous butterfly species and others. So they constructed their own version of this, which is sort of interesting that every city might have their own nature pyramid. So we have a lot of challenges, and we have become profoundly disconnected from the nature, the natural environment. I do this I've been doing this visual survey for many years where I show audiences, and I've shown a lot of students, native species of flora and fauna, common species of birds and trees and plants, and the recognition level is very low. It often is a very discouraging thing to do. I've kind of stopped doing it now, partly because it is so discouraging. So this critter on the top is a silver-spotted skipper. It's actually, you must have it here, a very common species of butterfly. And over the course of hundreds of people, I've had maybe 2 correctly identify it, and mostly it is recognized as a moth, which it could be. But a lot of people declare it to be a monarch butterfly. It doesn't look anything like a monarch butterfly. Apparently Americans, the only butterfly we know is a monarch butterfly. And I've had at least two or three respondents tell me that it was a hummingbird, which I thought was kind of creative. So we don't have any trouble with corporate logos, though. So as one little indicator, and I'm not usually asking, I don't actually care that much if people can't tell me the name, but if they, as long as they recognize it. And that's, so we have become disconnected. And for me lately, biophilia is very much, it's not just the things that you see, it's the sound, it's multisensory. And sound for me is a very special part of this. In my part of the world, this time of year, summer coming, and where the nighttime, the evening sounds are just therapeutic. And they're place embedding, and they take me back to my childhood, in fact. And sounds are really important, and we are just as incapable, by the way, of recognizing and identifying the sounds that we hear. I don't have time today, but I often give a little sound element to this quiz. And there's a beautiful sound that I hear almost every evening, which is an eastern screech owl, and it's this beautiful, has this kind of part of the sound is a downward whinny, kind of. Okay, it sounds like a sick owl, but you get the idea. It's a beautiful sound, and once you hear it, you never forget it. But most people don't know what it is, so it becomes a kind of background noise. In contrast to thinking about those sounds in the city as voices. This is a beautiful quote. Val Plumwood was an environmental ethicist from Australia. She's since passed away, but she talked a lot about hearing sound as voice. So we have been trying to develop sound maps for Charlottesville, and we're about to launch one for Portland, Oregon, which is one of our partner cities. And we've got to think more about the sensorial dimensions of this, and especially sound. So, by the way, 2 summers ago, I spent a bit of time in Australia recording urban sounds there, and this was one of my favorites, the Australian raven, which has this sound almost like a baby crying, very distinctive, and they talk to each other. It's just a beautiful place-embedded sound. Okay, so the remaining slides really are just a few stories about what our partner cities are doing, some of the things that they're doing, some of the ways they're imagining their cities as being more connected to nature and more full of nature. So this is Luisa Rive, who is the environment director for the city of Vitoria-Gasteiz, the capital of the Basque Country in Spain. And they were last year's European Green Capital city. And they've been well known in Europe for this remarkable green ring that circles this city. It's a terrific effort promoting a compact, mixed-use, very walkable, dense Spanish city, but then having this amazing natural feature surrounding the city. Most neighborhoods are never more than a short walk away from the green ring, and includes actually a conversion of their former municipal airport, back into a wetland, which has become a rather important migratory bird stopover. But the latest story in Vitoria is that they have elected a new mayor, and the mayor campaigned on bringing the green ring into the city. So they're now talking about an interior green ring, which seems sort of counterintuitive, the language of that, but it's interesting. So this is an initial mapping of possibilities, and they're starting with one corridor where they're going to be bringing back to the surface a stream that has been underground in a pipe. So this idea of stream daylighting that actually several of our partner cities are working on. So a terrific story there. Oslo is another of our study cities. Remarkable effort here to connect to nature. 2/3 of the city of Oslo is in protected forest. We call it Marka, they have a word for it. And a public transit system where transit stations have been located to get people to the forest. And they're densifying that remaining third of the city. So they're becoming more compact and denser and more sustainable at the same time that they're protecting and enhancing that nature. The latest part of the Oslo effort has been a municipal green plan, which envisions daylighting, bringing back to the surface and restoring the 8 major rivers that run through the city, so connecting the forest with the fjord. The lower map actually is of their amazing urban trail network, which is another part of the Oslo story. So you're never very far away from a trail. This is an image on the left of one segment of the trail, just a few hundred meters away from offices and dense urban environment. So the ability to get out and get on a bicycle and to have access walking and bicycling to these larger green networks is really quite an important aspect of a biophilic city. San Francisco is another of our partner cities, and they partly what they are working on is how do you take smaller leftover spaces in the city and incorporate nature and growing of plants and growing of food increasingly. So they have a project run by the Public Works Department in San Francisco to allow neighborhoods to take over the median strips in certain places. They have a couple hundred of these. And this is one which is right on the beach, and a case of a little 500 feet long, 16 or 17 feet wide sort of space that's now become a community gathering spot and grows some food and has some nature in a pretty dense urban environment. The latest story, San Francisco has done so many things to make it easier to convert hard space to nature. They've had a fantastic effort at creating a new permitting system for sidewalk gardens that actually allows neighborhoods to take up some of the, oh my gosh, okay, I've got to go faster, 5 minutes left. So the most recent story is their Parklets program. So they've created a mechanism for converting on-street parking spaces. So a parklet, this concept of a parklet, 2 to 3 on-street parking spaces converted to a park. And this is an image actually of the first residential parklet. This is Jane Martin on the right, who's a landscape architect and who designed this little space, but delivers quite a bit of nature, including a vegetative dinosaur, which connects to the deeper history in that city. Portland, I mentioned, is another partner city. They have 1,000 green features in this city that collect stormwater, this idea of green streets and multifunctional spaces in the city, providing nature but also collecting and treating stormwater. This is Linda Dobson, who heads the stormwater program in Portland. She's our partner, and she's standing in the courtyard of an apartment complex called 10th and Hoyt, where all the water collected on that, all the water that falls on that site is collected and kept there and circulated around through a series of interesting water features and water art. And the residents actually come out when it rains to listen to the rain. What a marvelous story. I mentioned Milwaukee. These are images of the third neighborhood-based ecology center, which is quite spectacular. And they're actually taking a portion of the Menominee River and restoring it. The whole story of rivers and the importance of rivers in the ecology and the nature cities is a key one. My last few slides, and then I'll stop, have to do with Singapore. Singapore, I mentioned, is a partner city. And the story here is interesting. We have a special interest in Singapore as we imagine more cities growing in a very vertical way. How do you have a vertical city? Most residents of Singapore are living in high-rise buildings. How do you maintain or foster that connection with nature, with the natural world, in that very vertical realm? And this is an area where Singapore has really been innovative. So This image on the right, they've added about 2 million people in the last 15 years at the same time that the percentage of green cover has increased, not decreased, but increased. So they've invested in parks. They have a fantastic, what they call a system of park connectors. So creating trails and walking structures that get people from those densest parts of the city to the existing parks. Much of it looks like this, which is an elevated canopy level walk system. They've been subsidizing, helping to support the creation of new gardens, new school greening initiatives. We've actually just done a film about Singapore, so if you're interested, the whole film is on YouTube. It's about 45 minutes. If you just Google Singapore, a biophilic city, you'll find it. So we tell stories. We film in a number of places. This is a fantastic, amazing green school, and a fernery in the background of these students. And Bishan Park, where they've basically taken a channelized river and turned it back into a beautiful, meandering natural system. Probably most impressively, though, the city has been promoting this idea of vertical greening. The National Parks Board has actually created a skyrise greening division within government to promote this. So there are subsidies. There's a research and development aspect to this. They're testing different vertical systems and trying to understand what works. They have standards now that require that when you build a new building, you have to compensate for the green taken away. You actually have to provide more green in the vertical calculation than you've taken over in terms of surface area. So this is one example. On the left, Solaris is a new Kenyang building where it's designed as there's a 1.5 kilometer forest that wraps around the structure. It's a different kind of nature, obviously more artificial, but it does deliver benefits, and in a very vertical urban environment, that's quite important. A more local example is Via Verde in New York, and we did some interviewing there, and there's a little case study about this Bronx project, Jonathan Rowe's project. It was just terrific, where there's a forest on the 3rd level, a orchard on the 4th, raised bed gardens on the 5th, and then as you progressively go up, kind of tiered roof system, really quite creative, and leading to a very high-rise building. So green in a very dense sort of urban environment. Okay, I've run out of time. There are other programs that I could tell you about. Maybe I'll stop here. We've become as interested, again, there's the physical design of cities and the green elements, but there are also the programming elements. And how do we get urbanites imagining themselves interested in all of these things around them? So we've just, the e-newsletter coming out this week will profile a really interesting project based in North Carolina and Florida called the School of Ants. I want you to enroll in the School of Ants. This is a citizen science project that involves kids sending ant samples from around the country, and they've developed a fantastic urban ant key, a kind of guide to how you identify the different species of ants that you're likely to find. And these folks have actually, the ones that did the ants studies of the median strips in New York, and actually discovered an entirely new species of ant that hadn't been known about. So I'll stop there, and I probably have more slides, but maybe I'll have a chance to insert more as we go along.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.